see the way they hate. And I know better than to listen to the people who are calling us slaves. I can feel the sun.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Brian, and today is Thursday, June 8th, 2023, and this is episode 427 of the Lots Project podcast, and it's another episode of Lots to Talk About, and we're doing a special live Thursday night. My guest was available on a Thursday night. Usually I do pre-records, but when I have a live guest and have the opportunity to fill the spot in with something live and hopefully interactive, take that opportunity to book it. So with that, tonight I asked Eric from Porterhouse and Teal to come on and talk and chat about biochar. I have a few ideas around biochar and Toolman Tim's Delinquent's Gully here in Tennessee. And as I started researching that, I came across a whole playlist on Porterhouse's channel, on his YouTube channel. You're going to want to check that link down in the video description when you get a chance. But I reached out, and Eric has agreed to come on and discuss kind of what he has experienced over the year, or a little bit more than a year, I guess, of dealing with biochar and the different things he's tried out and went through. So I want to bring him on and talk about that, and hopefully do a little brainstorming on the Delinquent's Gully project. But with that, I would like to bring on to Lots to Talk About Eric from Porterhouse and Teal. How's it going, man?
Good. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I started digging into this biochar thing, not necessarily because everybody is hot to talk about it and put it on my farm or stuff like that, but I'm traveling around in an RV. So what the hell would I want to do with biochar? I think my audience knows, but Toolman Tim's got some undeveloped property out there, and there's just a shitload of biomass, deadfall, slash, things that needs to be taken down. And as I started looking into ways to capitalize on that and not make it a waste stream, I started looking at biochar. And it's great because there's news everywhere. But one guy that popped up on my YouTube searches over and over and over was you. And so I wanted to bring you out and talk to you. My audience may or may not know you if they're in the self-reliance circles. I'm sure they heard of your name, but I do have some RV listeners and other genres. So take a second, introduce yourself, who you are, and then let's talk some biochar.
Yeah, my name's Eric. I'm a retired firefighter. I was a firefighter for 30 plus years, and retired in 2015, both my wife and I. However, we've been homesteading on our property since 2000. And I grew up on a farm as a kid, so I've, had that in my background my entire life, growing up around animals and dealing with animal husbandry and that sort of thing. In 2000, we decided to expose our kids to that. And we moved from the suburbs where we bought our first home, and we purchased our land up here. We've got 22 acres in California, and we've been living on that property ever since. But we both retired in 2015, became empty nesters, and we decided at that time to relinquish a bit of our responsibilities and the keys that we were holding on to. We wanted to reduce the amount of keys on our key ring. And so we got in our motorhome, and we started making a lot of trips across the country, visiting family and just seeing what was out there. And at that time, we really wanted to kind of step away from the homesteading lifestyle, since it's something that we'd done for a while and, kind of almost like been there, done that. And so we did that for a few years, and we wound up in, I think it was around 2020 is kind of a date a lot of people might know what happened in 2020, but that was a time when we realized, hey, maybe we should get back to doing some of those things with regard to that we were doing in the past. And we really ramped it up from there and accelerated what we were doing by our food production. And, even prior to that, though, I was inspired by some of the things I was seeing in the, on YouTube. I was seeing people do a lot of cool stuff, and I started getting inspired in that. And one of them was biochar. Another was, permaculture. And I was introduced through that by a guy named Jack Spirko. It was the first guy that I had ever heard about
That
permaculture.
that jerk has got us hooks into all of us.
Right, man. Right. Yeah. He's got a pretty broad reach. A lot of people listen to his podcast, and I really got a lot of my ideas from Jack, at least regarding going down the permaculture rabbit hole. And
Absolutely.
so that's about the time I started looking into as well, when I saw people doing things on biochar and learning more about that. And yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell my brief background and journey to this point.
So when you took off in the RV, you held on to the acreage
Oh, for sure.
kind of shut everything down and just kind of went on trips or found somebody to farm
Yep.
sit. Or, yeah. So we did like the opposite. We just sold everything and we're looking for someplace new. But you liked where you were at, and we didn't particularly care for it. And so this is kind of our journey to find that place that you already had.
Right.
But I get it. We went hard for 5 years. We put a 5-year plan out on the homestead to try everything we could. And we tried rabbits and we tried quail and chickens and turkeys and all of it. And then at 5 years, the weather just beat us down. And we said, this has got to be easier somewhere else. We love doing it. But the break will be nice, and finding someplace else and experiencing someplace else will be great. 2020 changed your mind. We decided to do this in September of 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we made that final call, and we were able to stay steady through all the changes and all the disasters and all the hype. But it really tested us to make sure this is what we really wanted to do. So I echoed, I heard you telling your story about getting in the RV and checking things out. And I was like, it sounds really familiar. Except I had that punch in the face right when we were planning everything. So yeah.
Yeah. We kind of set this up so that we didn't get rid of anything. We still had actually our cows and stuff like that. We just had a handful of cows around here to manage the pastures. We need ruminants on this property to manage the fire hazard and manage the pastures. So we kept, the number of cows that we had, which was pretty minimal. We had I think 5, cows just to manage on here, but it was very easy to just put a couple of big bales of hay out there, or rice straw or something like that. And then they can just fend for themselves while we were gone. And we have relatives that are close by where they could drop in and just make sure that they still have water and everything was cool.
Yeah, I mean, we drive through the upper Midwest there, and you see cows that you haven't seen people in forever. So it's like I think they're built for that, and that's kind of a perfect way to escape. Right. But the fireman kind of really ties into the biochar. You probably have a lot of that fire. Combustion, pyrolysis, gasification knowledge from the firefighting service.
Right. Yeah, that's something that early on you learn, when you first go to the academy. They teach you fire investigation, and that's one of the things that you wind up learning, pyrolysis and how a fire burns, and how to all of the processes that happen as a result of a fire kind of lead back to the origin. So you learn that sort of thing kind of early on. So pyrolysis isn't necessarily a new term for me. It's just something that applies directly to permaculture.
And it's really weird. It's really weird when I started looking into it, and I know I'd heard people say biochar, and I knew basically what it was. But when I started diving in, and I started seeing pyrolysis, and I started seeing gasification, I spent 5 years working for a startup that did pyrolysis of waste plastic into synthetic crude oil. So we brought the plastic to temperature under a vacuum, which gasified it, and then recondensed it into a liquid form, because plastic's just hydrocarbons. So basically we broke down the hydrocarbons and quenched them at a certain temperature to reconstitute them in the form we wanted. But being a startup, I worked really closely with the CTO, the vendor that made the system, the process engineer, doing R&D, because we went through many phases of different systems and different end products. but I learned a lot about the pyrolysis side of hydrocarbons and breaking that down. So I'm coming at biochar from a completely different industry, but understanding the concept. And as I was working at the startup, I was taking notes on building like my own gasification power plant with a gasifier and an old engine and running the pulleys and all that. It's in a notebook somewhere, but
Yeah.
it's all the same. It's all the same concept. And so bringing you on this has the practical experience and trying to mix that with my convoluted plastic side of it. I think it's interesting. So
Yeah, for sure, man.
So what got you? Did Jack mention it way back, or was there something else that kind of spurred you into it? Where did it tip off?
I actually heard it before I heard Jack mention anything about it. Just coming across it on some of the channels that I began following. Somewhere early 2019, and I think it was like the latter part of 2019 on in the first part of 2020 when I actually learned of Jack. And I just got turned on to his community around that time. I actually came to Jack through listening to, I can't think of his name right now. It'll come to me. But anyhow, I came to Jack sometime, I think late 2019 or early 2020. But I had heard of the other before, but then I also saw somebody that he had on. It was a lady that he had on that was talking about biochar, and it kind of, again, when I was digging into it, I wound up listening to that particular episode. But I tried to learn as much as I could at that time, and just doing some of my own research. And then I started to try to validate some of the things that people were saying. I think that's the best way that you can actually figure things out for yourself, whether or not they work. We can watch and listen and all of that, and that's very helpful. But in order to really figure it out, you kind of have to actually just go out there and try it yourself. So
right. So for people that don't know, that might be tuning in and they search biochar in YouTube or whatever, or podcast, what is biochar?
Yeah, biochar is just basically any biomass, which biomass is just organic material. Recently living or currently living is biomass. We're biomass. Everything that's organic, that's either living or recently living, is biomass. So we're talking about things like wood and grass and different organic things that would ordinarily be thrown away can be converted into biochar, and that's what biomass is. So what happens in the process is basically you're burning that organic material in the absence of oxygen or in an oxygen deprived atmosphere. So it doesn't have to be completely devoid of oxygen. That's very helpful if it is, right, because you're going to get a much more pure product. But it's starving that biomass, starving that organic material during the burning process, and you're going to be left with basically a carbonized skeleton, if you will. It's just going to be this block of pure carbon is going to be what remains. Now, if that were to have burned in the presence of oxygen, it would continually burn, and what you would be left with would be wood ash. But we're burning it in a oxygen deprived atmosphere, and it basically, what happens is it just drives off all of those volatiles, all of the volatile gases, all of the volatile organic compounds are being driven off once it's heated up to its ignition temperature. And then once those are all gone, it doesn't burn if it's got no oxygen at that point. It's just heating it up. All those gases are being driven out, and you're left with this pure carbon shell. And that becomes a vehicle for microbiology to inhabit. It becomes a vehicle to draw in nutrients, draw in all kinds of different like bacterial and fungal life, uses that skeleton as a habitat. So I use it for microbial habitat and water retention. It's very water retentive. It holds a tremendous amount of water. And one of the experiments I did early on, which really solidified that for me, because I had heard, oh, it's very water retentive, but I had also heard that in order to have good char, it shouldn't have any smell and it shouldn't have any taste. So I thought, oh, hey, maybe I'll go try this stuff and see what it's like. And I actually did it on my very first biochar video that I had done when I built my retort.
I snapped a screenshot of that for the thumbnail. I was like, this is perfect. And I was able to go frame by frame to get you actually just chomping on it. I was like, okay, this is it right here.
Yeah, you didn't see the aftermath, dude. It wasn't pretty. I cut that part out of the video.
I can only imagine it just must have been a mess.
Oh, well, let me just tell you, if you want to take every bit of moisture out of your mouth instantaneously, try that. But I do not recommend it, because that's exactly what happens. You bite into it and it just explodes in your mouth. And it's just like every bit of moisture is drawn out and it's horrid. So,
it's the new TikTok saltine challenge. It's going to be the biochar challenge.
Yeah.
So that is, so you were mentioning the volatiles coming off and the doing the process in the complete lack of oxygen. You need to draw a vacuum on something. That was our linchpin in our whole system, was drawing a vacuum with the eventual material, eventual gas that's going to be coming through that vacuum is disgustingly dirty. And as it condenses, it's going to give you that oil. It's going to give you all that stuff that's coming out of that carbon, and it gums up your vacuum very quickly. So that was our issue. But the nice part is, when you create gas in a container, it's going to push itself out. Mm-hmm. We'll eventually talk about that reactor. But how did you get started? Like, what kind of process did you just choose a stupid, simple process and kind of go for it? Or did you kind of build something to begin with? Or was it just what you had laying around?
Yeah, I didn't actually build anything for the first bit while I was trying to figure it out. I wound up just basically doing a couple of different experiments, if you will, and trying to create char. And one was just burning the pile on top of the ground, absent a cone. And once you get your pile very hot, then you start adding your material on top of it, as you would with a cone, to try to starve the material at the bottom of oxygen. So I was doing that, and then, pulling the coals out and trying to quench at that time. And then I kind of decided, hey, I'll try a cone. And so I did a cone, had some success with it. I mean, obviously you can make really, really good char there. It's just a process of, it's something that requires a lot of attention, so to speak. It requires a lot more attention than the retort that I built. And then I graduated to something a little bit bigger and made a trench out of that cone and played around with that for a little bit and made some char. And then I had the opportunity, because I had the available resource of getting those barrels for free. And it was just a perfect opportunity where I didn't pay any money to make the biochar retort that I currently use.
Right. And for anybody that's listening or watching, so the biochar retort that you're using now is basically a drum inside a drum with basically a smokestack, gas stack that comes out the middle, and you heat around the core, and that brings the inside barrel to ignition temperature.
Mm-hmm.
Combustion would have oxygen in there, but you keep it pretty much devoid of oxygen, because the oxygen is being consumed by the outside burning material.
Right. Yeah. It winds up it winds up well beyond ignition temperature eventually, but like that's the first point at which gases are going to start to escape from that biomass, is once it reaches.
Do you burn your flare on that?
Do I what?
Do you burn the flare on that, or is that just released oxygen, or released to the atmosphere?
It's just released. I mean, I wish that I haven't given a whole lot of thought to further the experiment, because it just takes more time and mental energy to try to figure out another way to capture that expended, energy.
Yeah, I mean, and wood gas in general, unless you're capturing or you're utilizing it as it's being produced, from what I've gathered over 10 years of looking into stuff, is it's very ineffective to capture. It's something that you have to burn as you're getting it. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure some crazy brainstorm while I'm sitting out in the woods will come up, but yeah. Anyway, so you started with the trench method. So basically, it's all the same concept. You're getting that core of your feedstock material, the stuff that you actually want to end up as biochar, and you're putting a coating of feeds or combustibles around it to bring that temperature up. So that's kind of the basic concept in any setup.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you take your trench or your pit, and you put material in it. You want basically a good hot bed of coals. So you're going to burn it. It's going to basically kind of consume down. There's going to be ash produced at that point. But once you have a good hot basis to start with, then you can start adding the material that you want to turn into char. And then when that stuff starts to turn to white, you start to see white ash appearing, then you're going to go ahead and add another layer and just successively add to that material. And essentially what will happen is the material underneath will wind up being starved of oxygen to the point where it will, be in the state of pyrolysis. And you'll be able to, once the pit is filled up, and you can start quenching, whenever you want to start extracting that material. But
Okay.
yeah,
so basically it ends up like a campfire that you put out early.
Yeah, essentially, but you need to be able to monitor it so that it once it starts to turn to ash, once you start to see that white ash develop, you're going to be, adding more material to try to smother the stuff that's on the below, and it's going to create that starved, atmosphere to the stuff that's on the bottom. Yeah, I think that one of the things that's kind of important in that is you want to try to have your material somewhat the same size. It's really helpful if you can kind of keep your material in the same range, as far as, because it just seems to go better that way, at least in my experience.
It's all you're working with the same starting point for the same. It's going to combust the same. If it's the same wood type and size, it should consume about the same speed.
Exactly. And also too, the material that you're putting in, works best if it's dry. The wetter it is, it's not going to work as good. If it's dry, you're going to get a good, clean, hot burn, and better char in the end.
So I see people talking about the tilted barrel method. Is this something you've looked into, tried, know much about? I haven't dug into it much at all. If I was going to source a barrel, I'd find a welder and make the retort, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. I have not worked with that. I am not even familiar with it, to be quite honest. There's a lot of different people out there that are trying a lot of different methods and, have some really great ideas. I'm always interested in finding new and better ways to do those sorts of things. So if somebody has something that seemingly works well, I would be more than interested to adopt that, or maybe give that a go. But I haven't been really familiar with that. But I have seen people with the barrels that are, horizontal and flat, and essentially they're just kind of creating a trench, but it's not in the ground. It's basically just in a barrel.
Right, so you're not digging the trench. You're basically mimicking the same thing in a container.
Yeah.
Nice. So once you burn it, and if you quenched it, if you're doing trench method, if you have your retort, you're taking the char out. Is it done then? Is that just, are you good to go at that point?
No. So what happens when the material is burned? Once it basically is, cools, you're going to be left with those volatiles remaining. You're going to have some residual tars, and you're going to have some residual stuff that's going to basically solidify during the cooling process on the char itself, not only on the surface on the outside, but all throughout that pore space. Because essentially, for those that don't know, one of the real benefits and the unique things about biochar, if it's done correctly, is the porosity of it. It has a tremendous amount of pore space, which has a lot of water and nutrient holding capabilities. So all of those pores will have that, those volatiles will solidify and cool and condense and adhere to that, making that material hydrophobic, meaning it's not going to absorb water. It's not going to absorb those nutrients. It's going to repel them. So we want to actually, we need to change that. And so there's a few different ways that you can do that. One is through the application of water directly before it has the opportunity to cool in its entirety. That's going to be helpful to it, but also through time, I think is the best way that I've found to do that, because it's just something that's going to take some time for that to be able to be hydrophilic, meaning it's going to actually draw in rather than repel. And so if you do that, adding that water during the quenching process before it has an opportunity to cool, as I said, it's going to lessen the hydrophobic effect of that. But I think, again, it's best if you are not trying to rush that process and you give it ample opportunity to go through that process.
Dissipate that. It's almost like it's putting a shellac on the outside with the condensation of the oils. Is there a way, like you said, quenching it earlier in the process before those volatiles condense? Is this an issue in the retort also? Does it not burn completely so that you're having to process it further in the retort and kind of get rid of the volatiles that condense on the outside of the char?
No, I think that it's a much more efficient and clean procedure doing it in the retort. There's, when I open up the barrel, there's zero ash. It's a very clean and complete carbonization of that biomass. So but what the problem that I see is that there's going to be more of that volatile compound solidifying on it because I don't quench initially. It has the opportunity to cool until the next day.
Right.
So what I wind up doing is I will, during the crushing process, it'll get water. It'll have water so that it's not dust flying everywhere. And I wind up using the water at that point, but then it's going to go from that stage and it's going to go into my compost yard, and it's going to get to live in compost for the rest of its life, essentially, until it goes out and gets used. And the compost that I keep in that yard, generally it won't come out anything less than 2 months. And typically it's 6 months or longer before it comes out. So it's going to have all that opportunity for those volatiles to be broken down and it start to become inoculated with the nutrient that's in that compost. So I think I've heard other people say that. There's a guy that's pretty learned on this. He knows his shit. His name's Michael Whitman, and I think Jack's had him on a couple of times. And he, that dude really is pretty squared away when it comes to biochar. And that's one of the things he was saying as well, is just inoculating it in the compost yard. And that's the way that I've been doing it for well over a year now.
I saw you were adding the crush to like your chicken bedding. Are you still doing that? That seems like a brilliant odor absorber and nutrient absorbent as they kind of mess with that stuff.
Yeah, that's just another way to get that stuff in a stage where it's going to be, that's like function stacking, right? You're going to be getting the odor reduction, but it's also taking the opportunity to break down those volatiles, and it's something that the chickens are going to be able to consume, or whatever livestock that you're putting it before, they're going to want to go ahead and consume it. Just this morning, I wound up crushing a little bit more and putting it in with my pigs. So my pigs use a bathroom in a specific area. I've trained them to do that. And I basically put the charcoal right in that area, and they go over there and they'll snack on it, but they'll also pee on it and, defecate on it right there. So it's function stacking. It's allowing the pigs to do it before I even take that out and put it in with my compost. So yeah, there are things that you need to do to it prior to just putting it into your soil, because what's going to happen if you take that material and you stick it directly into your tomatoes, where you're growing your tomatoes or something, it's going to compete with that plant because of how absorbent it is. It's going to start to try to, once it breaks down those volatiles and it starts to receive, it's going to start to pull away from your plants. So you really do want to charge it before it goes in with stuff you're going to actually try to grow. You don't want it to directly compete with, the vegetables.
You want it to be a net positive going in than a draw out of the soil. So one of the community members is a butcher, and he's been kicking around the idea of doing biochar with bones from when he's processing cattle and stuff like that. He also is wondering right now, when you were talking about adding nutrient at the end, if someone had an excess amount of blood, which is an odd statement, but as a butcher, you're bleeding stuff out. If he could capture that, that would probably be a pretty decent thing to inoculate that biochar with.
Yeah, I imagine so. I would probably be more inclined to utilize it in my composting operation, but I wouldn't. I think that it probably would have a positive effect on.
You could probably just mix that right in, both of them in with a composting system, and have the huge benefit of all of it together.
Yep. That's what I would do. And with respect to the bones, that's one of the things that I wind up doing with all the excess bones that I pull out of the chicken yard, because the chickens wind up getting a lot of food scraps. They'll occasionally get some roadkill. They'll occasionally get something that's been butchered here that we wind up saving for the winter time, and we'll throw that in the chicken yard and allow them to get after and get what it is that they want out of it. And then whatever's left, those bones, I wind up collecting them out of the compost, and then I stack them in my milk crates that I have there. And then I'll wind up taking that material and directly putting it into my retort and making char out of it. And it makes fantastic char.
I was going to say, is it similar to a wood burn?
What do you mean as far as the burn?
Because I don't get about the same time. Is it the same?
I see.
Does it turn out the same as wood?
Yes. Yeah. I actually think it's, and I don't know this. I'm just looking at it. I'm just visualizing it. I'm not, I haven't done any scientific, hey, it's better, it's more porous or whatever. But there's all that bones are very porous anyhow,
Right.
And so when you do it and then you crush it, it's just, I think it's actually kind of better than wood in some respects. But again, that's just me looking at it. I'm not really scientifically.
It's speculation. You run it through your head. I mean, you're obviously an intelligent dude, and you just think about it. Jack kind of points to that a lot. Is you can figure a lot of shit out just by stepping back and going, wait, what is the connection here? When you were mentioning the porous bone, I remember just bone meal and crushed bone and stuff from processing rabbits and things always went in the compost and then into the garden. And you'd be digging in there, and you'd find it's breaking down, but you'd see the holes in it. Or you found like a bleached deer skull from somebody, animals finding it, and it's very brittle and porous. I can see where that would, if you sped that process up through pyrolysis, it would turn very nice.
Yeah. I've actually done a couple of videos on that. I'm just kind of showing people that, hey, this is what it looks like when you're doing bones, and, you ham hock bone or leg bone or something from a deer and whatever. And I'm telling you, it makes great char, and it's not a resource worth wasting if you can take that material and you can sequester it into a pure form of carbon, and then potentially benefit your property for centuries. I think that's a very cool thing to be able to do.
Right. Well, and it's a heck of a lot more beneficial, a lot quicker than throwing bones in the soil,
Oh
which
yeah.
would eventually be fine. But a lot further down the road, you're kind of speeding that up. And
Yeah.
Kyle added to that he's been contemplating laying down sawdust when he bleeds out, and then mixing that
Oh yeah.
into his compost
100%.
would be phenomenal.
100%. Yeah, that would be some good stuff, man.
Especially seeing he's doing like 3 cows a week.
Yeah, that would be some gold right there, man. Like just great fertility you'd get out of that,
And then,
all that nitrogen and
yeah, and then just taking all that bone matter and turning it to char. He'd have a nice little system going on there.
yeah, it would be pretty cool to do. I mean, I think it's pretty cool for what it does for developing your soil life, providing that habitat for your soil, both microbial and fungal, and the water retentive properties to it. But also the other thing is just what it does for your land. And I think that's one of the things that, has changed my mind in the permaculture realm, because I never used to think this way, but what are we doing for our land to give back to our land? We as stewards of our land typically just take from it all the time. But when you start looking at it, like, how can I actually give back to this land? How can I return that surplus? And to do it in a way that is potentially going to outlast generations, that to me is very powerful when you think about it. You're not just planting a tree, which is super cool. You're not just driving a Prius and virtue signaling. You're fucking taking carbon, and it's going to be there in the soil long after all of us are gone. I just think that's incredibly cool.
Right. Absolutely. It's what flipped my switch to the whole concept you just were mentioning was our backfield that we ended up pasturing chickens and turkeys on. When we purchased the property, it had been a decade of just haying it, not putting anything on it, not doing anything. It was just hayed every year, cut down and fed to some animal. When we came in, we had it hayed the first year. You could walk through that field, and we didn't cut it the second year, and it was waist high. You could walk through it no problem. It was really wispy. We ran chickens on that, and within 1 year, you were tripping through the paths that we ran the chicken tractors through. And when we took a above photo, you could see the difference in the green lushness of that chicken shit and what it did for that pasture in one run. And then we ended up doing it 3 or 4 years in a row. And that pasture, the change in it, I was just like, okay, this was just because I took the time to go out and move that thing twice a day. And these birds changed this pasture for something that I could walk waist deep in, to now when it's, 14 inches deep, I'm tripping on the thick grass.
Yeah. It's pretty cool, man, to see the changes. But, one of the things with regard to building soil is that it seems like everybody wants those results right now. And the fact is that soil built in nature, if you're trying to replicate that, it takes forever. And if we're trying to not rush the process, we have to be patient. And biochar really is kind of adding to the long game. It's the long-term building of that soil, just as creating fertility is. It takes time. And so I just think everybody kind of wants things right now. We want that, 15-day compost, right? But what have we made?
Right.
We just don't know, because we're not necessarily soil scientists. So I just think that it's one of those things you kind of have to step back and just realize, what you're doing is something more and bigger than you. And it's definitely a benefit.
Right. So I brought you on for that, and that's been a great. This has just been a great
renegade.
Kind of, the good soil is as old as dirt.
That's a good one.
He's always good for at least one in one of my shows. So, but that's kind of a great basic explanation, what it is, kind of a few ways that it's made. I have this project that I'm kind of contemplating in my head. Toolman Tim, he's got 10 acres down here in Tennessee that's undeveloped There's a ton of deadfall. There's a ton of slash. There's a ton of stuff that needs to be consumed, moved, or disposed of in some nature. And so I started thinking biochar. Now, hearing what you are talking, I want to be able to, since we're not on site all the time, it's not on our farm or on our homestead. This is going to be something that we're going to want to do while we're there working. And the trench method seems like a lot of, you're there the whole time. You're watching, you're monitoring, you're pulling things out, you're quenching things. And it sounds more like a retort is the exact opposite of, once it's set up, it does its thing. Am I kind of gathering that perspective?
Yeah, I would agree with that, at least in my experience and what I've done. Others may dispute that, but that's just been my experience. It's a lot more hands-on when you're dealing with doing like a cone or a trench or some other method that you have to actually physically make sure it doesn't continually burn. But in a closed system, it's a little bit more self-regulating. So essentially I can light my retort and then spend about 15 minutes getting it up to temperature and getting everything to the point where I can shut the lid. And once that's done, I can walk away and come back in the morning and start it up all over again. The downside to the system that I have, I will say this, is that, you're not going to be running a lot of material in a 30-gallon drum, because you're going to lose 45% at least in volume. You're going to start with this and you're going to wind up with like that, right? You're almost half, you're going to lose volume.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask you. So the size reduction in a decent retort burn is going to be 45% yield of what you're putting in.
Yeah, I recently kind of did an experiment, because I actually had wondered that, but I hadn't wondered it to the point of actually doing anything about it until I had one of the people who was watching one of my videos ask the question in the comments. And I thought, that's a good idea, man. I'm kind of actually going to do that. And so I wound up running just an experiment in my retort. And this is my own personal experience on what I received. But I would say that it was somewhere around 45%, maybe a little less. There was a little bit more than half of the material that I started with. So I'd say a 45% reduction, maybe.
Okay.
And then the weight reduction was pretty significant. I had assumed it would be about 80%, and it factored in right around 77-78% of weight reduction of that material. And so you're not really going to do a tremendous amount. So if you have a lot of material to do, which it sounds like you guys do, the retort may not be doing enough for you. It may, either make something way bigger where you can put more material in it, or make multiples of those. But then that, to me, is still labor intensive, and there's probably going to be a cost to some extent. So I really think in that sense, what you were talking about, to me, it sounds like the trench method would be like your best option, quite honestly. I don't know. What are some of your ideas that you had as far as trying to maybe build a system?
Yeah. So when I started digging in, I looked at the trend. I looked at what I could do today with no materials, no nothing. And it seemed that with a shovel, I could accomplish that with a shovel and some water. A lot of water is also a restriction. There's a spring on the property, but right now we're not capturing a whole lot. I don't think it'd be a whole lot to have enough water to do something. But it seemed like the easiest way and most cost effective without sourcing free materials and things would be a trench type burn. But like I said, I want to be there clearing while my biochar system works for me. So I started looking into cones, things like that. It still seemed like there was a point where you're going to need to be there to quench. And then I came upon retorts. Now, I've started to brainstorm different. So the retort model with the 55-gallon, and K-Bonk was asking the inner chamber in that you used a 30-gallon inside a 55-gallon. Is that the setup you had?
Yeah.
So what I was contemplating was setting something up like that. I don't know if you've been through Tennessee, but there is a junkyard in everybody's yard, and I don't think sourcing materials is going to be a whole lot of problem. But building a retort that size, the 55 gallon, 30 in a 55, and getting it working, getting some consistent data, getting some consistent timing, and then possibly duplicating it or possibly experimenting with different vessels. Maybe going to a larger. I had one idea of a larger combustion ring around 255 gallon drums in it. So if I could find a large metal container to contain two smaller middle vessels, have the smaller vessels inside, to where you could just put together those ideas. They're just all around. But
right.
I think it's a multiple process. I think it's a like Renegade said, maybe a half dozen or a dozen of these retorts. If over time they get built and added into the system, that eventually you're going to be consuming enough to make it worth it.
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty good way to go, man. Just start out, figure it out for yourself, figure out how it's going to best work for you, because each one of those builds is going to be slightly different. You know, you're going to have to figure out how and where and how many of those holes to put in. Right. You know, I don't have any formula for mine. It's not like I've got this like, hey, you know, do it this way. I just did it, and then I wound up putting more holes in it to make it more efficient throughout the process. So it's one of those things you're just going to have to figure out on your own, and figure out like what's going to work. And I think that's a good way to start. And
that's all. Like I mean, it's always good to do the free materials. And as I'm driving around here, going different places, I'm just like scoping yards, and I see like old grain bins, just the sides, that have the big round container where you're going to be able to, I mean, obviously you're going to have to work with something to get in and out of it or remove it. Moving things mechanically is pretty, you can figure that out. I don't have a problem with rigging and stuff like that, but seeing those and picturing them in the retort model, maybe not exactly like something that you built, but the same principles. One of the questions I had is, does burning the combustibles hotter burn or finish the biochar quicker? So if you had your combustibles around the outside and you were recycling your wood gas as a burner, also adding calories to that burn, are you going to end it quicker, in your opinion? Do you know?
I don't have any like data on that. I just wind up putting the stuff in there and then, you know, feeding it to the point where it's full. And then if I feel as though the burn didn't get hot enough, I may on passing come by and toss a few more chunks in the top of the thing. And then that'll just continually, you know, cycle through and burn more off. But essentially that gas is being driven out of that 30-gallon drum, and it's reburning in the space in between the 30 and the 55-gallon drum. So it's reburning in that zone.
So you're exhausting it into the burn. So basically, instead of piping it back in, you're letting it expel out through the holes in the inner chamber.
Right. Ideally, that gas is going to be pushed out of the bottom of the drum, and it's going to start to rise. And as it rises, it's going to catch the fire that's coming down, and it's going to reburn again. So that's how it's supposed to work in theory, and it does to a certain extent. However, when everything gets going and it's just really ripping and that barrel's super hot, it's just burning, man. Everything in there is just like glowing, you know, and the only thing that's not burning is the material on the inside of that 30-gallon drum. Because there's, like I say, when I open it up, it's like black glass. It sounds like glass when you touch it, and there's zero wood ash produced from that. So I try to get my fire just as hot as I can and keep it there for at least, you know, like an hour and a half. And then throughout the remainder of that process, it just winds up burning, and it just kind of like cools off over time. And like I say, I come back the next day and it's really good char. It's really high quality stuff that's fully carbonized. I saw one of your comments there where a guy was saying put 20 55-gallon drums in a 20-foot diameter, vessel. I think that's a great idea. I would love to see something like that. Somebody try something like that. And
Oh, I will.
yeah,
Well,
that'd be rad, man. I'd like to see that. I guess my only concern with that would be what is going to be the vessel, that 20-foot vessel, because that's going to get pretty hot and you're going to have a lot of deformation if it's metal. So you're going to need to have something very thick and, or it's just going to not last very long in my opinion. But, and then you wind up with how are you going to seal the top, something that large? Is it going to be a sealed top and you'll have a door, like a door that you open up at the bottom? That would be pretty cool.
If you were building kind of a hybrid of kind of a pit cone method, but you had so you have your inner chamber or your retort, does your 55-gallon drum need to be sealed on top too for it to work?
Mm-mm.
In your system?
No, it's just basically kind of creating like a thermosiphon, just that stack. Mine would actually work better if I had a little bit longer of a stack. I've got this 8-inch stack that I've cut into the top, and it's just one short section that's like, 3 feet tall. If I had double that, it would create more of a draw and even a better burn, in my opinion. But I was only able to source one of those. It was right. All that material was free. I'm like, hey, what are you doing with that? And they're like, you can have it. And I'm like, cool. So
that's going to be my MO is hey, what are you doing with that out there? Oh, it looks pretty rusty. You mind if I take it? But no, I was thinking, so if you had your 30 inside your 55 has a stack that comes out and runs up through the 55.
Mm-mm.
No, there's no stack on the 30.
It's completely just a barrel, 30-gallon barrel with a top. And originally those came with those, bands that you could put on them to seal them. I don't use that. I just use like a heavy weight to just make sure that there's contact between the lip of the drum itself and the lid. And all of that stuff's super deformed because it gets so hot. And I've done close to, I think, about 85 burns in this barrel by now. And, I'm trying to, hopefully I'll be able to get it to 100 next year. But I think my burning season's pretty well over for this year because of, fire season and all. But no, there's no stack coming out of it. It's just the only holes that are in it are the holes that I put in the bottom of it, just as a relief for the gas to be escaping out. So I drilled 5 holes in the bottom. That material heats up, it pushes the gas out the bottom of it, and then it comes up along the sides and reburns in that space in the 55-gallon drum. But the only stack is the lid on the 55-gallon drum. But I would love to get another stack, but I'm not paying any money for that. None of what I've got is anything that I pay money for. I get all of my material on my biomass. I get as much as I want for free, and I'm not going to be out, buying stuff to burn.
Well, there's no at this point for your system and your goals. You're accomplishing that with what you have. I don't think there's any reason to dump resources in it to tinker unless you find it for free, like you said.
Right. Yeah. And, there's a lot of good ideas out there people have. And I've seen some of the things that people are trying to do and all. And I think those are great. I just haven't gone down that road because I really like the system that I have. It works well for me. And when this system goes, I'll probably replicate something very similar to it, but I'll probably see if I can't find another piece of stack somewhere so that I can try it with that taller chimney stack coming out. But other than that, I'm very happy with how this works, and it works well in a small scale environment. I just think that if you're doing a lot of material, you're going to need to do something a little bit more large scale, either in a system or doing the trench.
Right. Somebody asked, what about a shipping container as your outside vessel?
Man, that's a lot of. That's an interesting thing, man. I don't know. I'm not saying that it wouldn't work. it probably would work, but man, that's like,
I wonder if you could even go with like a small like pod size, like the smaller like 8x10 metal container. And then you got your doors, like you were mentioning, and you could definitely modify it to put a stack in the top. I mean,
right.
I wonder how many 55-gallon drums you could get in there.
Yeah, I imagine that would work. I mean, I would just be concerned about the cost of that because they're not giving any of those things away. I mean, unless
Oh, right,
somebody's like, you know, like, hey, you know, you
well,
want a shipping
and
container,
that's the other thing. That's the other thing I was wondering. So you're doing it on a personal level. You're using it to improve your property, but I see what they charge for this stuff. Their outlets, if you were able to come up with something, say we were making, 7 or 8 55-gallon drums on a Saturday, is there outlet for this in different stages? Because as we were talking about, like adding it to the chicken coop, that's less work for me. If somebody's going to take the crushed stuff and put it in their chicken coop, inoculate it and everything, you can get rid of it at a smaller price. Is there enough benefit to adding it to, say, a chicken bedding that you would be able to get some value out of a bag of it and make it worth doing the work to make a lot of it?
Yeah, I'm certain that there probably is. It's just finding that market for it. I think that there's people that would buy that. It's just how do you market it to people, and I guess that's a road that somebody's going to cross, whether it be you or someone else. But I definitely think that there's people. Yeah, I definitely think that there's people that would buy that for sure.
Right.
Just
I
by their
was also
people's
wondering
interest in it.
if you're quenching it with charged liquid.
I think you locked up on me there.
Sorry, internet jumped out. If you were to quench it or after the fact with like a comfrey tea, is that that would be a double kind of a more benefit than just making it water retentive?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that would be a great thing to do, is to take that char and put it right into some compost tea that you make. Yeah, that would be a great thing. I make a lot of compost tea, quite a bit around here. I use a 60-gallon olive barrel, and I just finished a batch like sometime this last week. And I don't really do that with my compost tea. I use it for other things, but that certainly would be a great application for that in charging that also working down the hydrophobic properties of it, but at the same time, it's going to start to inoculate that with that tea. But I don't do that. I just put it right in my chicken yard, but that's just the way that I do it.
Yeah, I've kind of pictured we have a lot of wild comfrey out there to deal with, and also I'm going to have a bunch of Bocking 4 out there, to where I think a low maintenance source some IBC totes and just do 250-gallon batches and let it sit and have that available for quenching. It'd be the Black Death, and it would smell disgusting when you got around to using it. But I think the stuff would be solid inoculation liquid.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the whole point is just to fill it up with something. It really doesn't matter as much what you're filling it up with, providing it's something that's going to be beneficial. So it could be a lot of different things: compost tea or urine or blood for that matter, or anything. But yeah, that's not a bad idea. That would certainly work pretty well, man.
They were wondering about a 20-foot pit in the ground and then putting D-rings on the 55-gallon drums to haul them out of the pit with a mini X or maybe a hoist or something. That's another interesting thing. If you were able to get it in the ground and covered, would you need to cover it with more than material? Or would you be able to burn those underneath a big enough stack of slash just piled up like a huge old burn pile?
Yeah, I'm not really picturing how that's going to work. What is he referring to there?
I think taking the 55-gallon drums, multiple 55 gallons, digging a big hole, putting them in the bottom, and then piling just huge piles of slash over top and burning it down into the pit, would that choke out the oxygen in the bottom with 55-gallon drums to use those as your burn vessels?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I suppose that could work, but I mean, we're talking about something that's pretty large, and there may be some things in there that are like it just doesn't work well, or it's incomplete, or you're wasting material that
Right.
could be used to actually turn something into carbon, and you've got too much. You could have to, it just would be a hard thing to kind of gauge and manage. I'm sure that
It's a
larger scale
balance between
operations.
a balance between control and babysitting, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the real question that I would have. I'm not saying that any of those things wouldn't work. They might work
Right.
fantastically, but it's getting to the point where you got to like walk, crawl before you
Right.
start to run, right? You can't just go right in on a 20-foot pit on your
Oh, right.
property.
Yeah, for sure. And this is the end. So these suggestions are like the end, and then the experimentation along the way is going to either prove or disprove a couple of different theories I'm going to have. I think is how it's going to work out. I think I'm going to kind of start messing around with a couple different versions like you did, that maybe can be married together, or some scaled and some not, and just do a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really it's such a simple process, really, that anybody can do. It's not like it's rocket science. It's just burning material and starving it of oxygen, and then you're left with that pure carbon. So I just think that you got to kind of start smaller scale to learn the process and figure it out, and then start ramping it up from there. And hell, who knows? Maybe in a little bit you'll be burning shit in a shipping container, like you said. But
well, right, like Josh said here, use IBC tote frames, and then you could fashion some metal around them. I don't know, tin would work, but more like maybe some metal roofing to make an enclosed burn chamber for your 55-gallon drums. Then inside that, you'd be able to, if you could source some cheap shit somebody's got in a throwaway stack, and fashion yourself something. But one question: what size diameter stack you running on your 55? Is that an 8-inch?
It's 8-inch, yes.
8-inch stack. All right.
Yeah.
Let me see here. Yeah, bury them, bury the frames. Yeah, these guys are all gonna have ideas. I'm gonna have a notebook list now that I got them thinking about it. So this may have been a little self-serving, but the conversation's been great. I want to throw it out there. If anybody's got any more questions, throw them in the chat real quick, and we'll probably get wrapped up here. I got you for an hour, and we're up at an hour, a couple of minutes after.
I think that suggestion with the IBC tote frames isn't a bad one, but I think you would find that those would wind up being molten metal, because I don't know how well those would hold up to the heat that's going to, I mean, we're talking, I would say, I haven't put a temperature on mine, but watch some of those videos that I've made making biochar, and that thing is like molten. It's dang near ready to like start melting. It's so hot. So it needs to be
with the plastic. We were running at anywhere from 1100 to 1300 Celsius. So,
Celsius.
Yeah, it was burning pretty good.
Yeah, I was going to say it was probably somewhere around 1200 Fahrenheit. Just guessing. It's at least that.
On the wood, I could see that.
Yeah, it's at least that. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's just one of those things. I really think actually doing it with the trench method, although more labor intensive, you're going to be able to get a significant amount of material burned, and it's a very simple process that doesn't take a lot. All you're going to need is manpower. If you had a work party of 3 to 6 dudes, you're going to get a lot of shit burned, because you can have somebody managing the pile, 1 or 2 people managing the pile, and the rest of the people are cutting to length and clearing as they go. And you're going to clean shit up quick that way. It's when you start trying to put it in these fancy vessels and building all this stuff. I'm not saying those aren't valid things to pursue, but
It might be a combination of when you got the hands, you can do the bigger burns in the trench, and if it's just me out there working on a weekend, I can fire off a couple of retorts and it kind of babysits itself. I think it's there's a lot of different avenues to be pursued for sure.
Yeah, fire up the barbecue, man, and get some whiskey flowing. Dudes will show up.
Well, there is that, and it's like before SRF, we're having a kind of it is remote. It's kind of dry camping beyond dry camping, and obviously SRF crew is down for that type of adventure. I think we're going to get some work done in a few days before SRF. We got some people that want to come down and camp and do some working. So,
right on.
Definitely lots of content to be made, but I appreciate you coming on, man. If you want to plug anything, I saw you had a Comfrey Tea video. Was that Comfrey Tea video that came out today?
No, that was just it was just a short that I did on a little bumblebee pollinating one of my hollyhocks in my garden. I thought it was kind of a cool shot. So
I got the notification. Weird. I started typing your name into YouTube and setting up the thing, and all of a sudden I'm getting notifications for your videos. I'm like, weird.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, man. I usually like to give people a couple minutes if they got stuff to plug or just a leaving message or anything. But take the floor for a minute, and we'll wrap things up.
Right on. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I'm going to be going down to Kentucky, Bowling Green, Kentucky. They're having actually Kentucky Sustainable Living is putting on a festival of their own. It's going to actually be right around the time of the fall SRF, but it's going to be October 27th through 28th and 29th. So the festival itself is on the 28th and 29th, and there has a couple of paid classes, one of which I'm going to be teaching, which is a permaculture fruit tree guild class, which is going to be held on Friday. So I will get with you, Brian, and shoot you the link to that. So if anybody's interested in checking any of that stuff out, they'll be able to go on and just source it from there. But I'm going to be teaching a class, and Chuck Peoples is going to be down there teaching a homestead medical class. And there's going to be a lot of different vendors that are going to be showing up to this particular event. So if anybody's going to be in the area and maybe they're wanting to go down and check out what's happening there in Kentucky, Bowling Green, I'll give you the link to that so people can go check it out. But other than that, man, I appreciate you having me on. It's been pretty cool, and good opportunity to talk a little biochar and chat with the folks that are in your community.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check out the Kentucky festival for sure, since we're going to be here for SRF, and then I think we have this place for now even through November if we don't lock it up for another year after that. So that's plenty of time to shoot up to Kentucky too, and probably well within striking distance. So I'll look forward to getting that link and checking that out, and I'll share it with my audience, especially if I'm going to end up going and hanging out too. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. If you could hang out for a second, I'll close things up and I'll catch up with you for a second after.
Right on.
All right. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys.
All right. I want to thank Eric for coming on. What a great chat on biochar, letting people kind of know a little bit about the basics. And then, just two people that have a little bit of knowledge about different things, brainstorming. It's always great. Audience participation was fantastic. I appreciate everyone hanging out and being in the chat. If you want to find out more about Porterhouse and Teal, I got a bunch of links down in the video description and audio description to their TikTok, their YouTube, their website, all of it. And I will get together with Eric and definitely promote that festival that he's going to be at up in Kentucky. So I appreciate him come on. This is another episode of Lots to Talk About. Like I always say, if you enjoyed the show, please consider sharing it with others. You can find it at thelotsproject.com, on Nostr, Telegram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Rumble, and Instagram. Be sure to listen on one of your favorite podcast 2.0 value for value podcast players like Podverse or Fountain.fm. Make it a great day, guys, and we'll catch up with you in the morning.